Okay, so let's start by why don't you just give me a little bit of your background about how you first got interested in Russia, and then we can go from there.
Sure. I'm of the generation that had to get under our desks in first grade, and just
I remember it well, yes.
I don't know how old you are, but
Yeah.
1958, and this is Bittenbinder's first grade class. She'd clap her hands in the middle of a lesson. We all had to run to the coat rack, get a coat, go into the hallway where the structure of the building was supposed to be better and stuff. Kneel down, put the thing over your head, and hope you didn't get blinded by the flash of Khrushchev's, bombs coming at us.
Right.
Who are these people? I mean, I'm 7 years old, and people are trying to bomb me. I'm watching the Yankees, and I'm worried about just life in general and stuff, and eating ice cream and stuff. And
Right.
it always stuck with me and stuff. So I went through two different job careers, different fields, and then the second one, after 6 years, I just got tired of it and decided, well, I'm going to go back to school. And it was in California, Southern California, and Cal State Fullerton had an amazing, very inclusive Soviet studies program. Practically every field you could think of, from language to geography to obviously language and political science and stuff like that. I think even the physical ed department had one course as well.
Wow.
So I jumped in with 2 feet, had no idea how I was going to make a living out of this and stuff. And so before that, I went to the summer before that, Monterey Institute of Foreign Studies, did a 10-week program on intensive living there and everything in Russian language, because I knew no Russian at all.
Yeah. And what year was this? What year was this?
That was 1977.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And so then I got through that, got my undergraduate degree in Soviet studies and political science. And I was lucky enough to apply and get accepted to the CIE program in Leningrad. And so I spent a summer semester in Leningrad. And that's what I fell in love with the country, because the people were just fantastic. This was 1980. And then I knew I'd done the right thing. So now I'm really excited. I got accepted to Georgetown and their Soviet economics program. Did that, and through a professor who was visiting professor who was the former president of the USSR Trade and Economic Council, had a class. And we all took that, and we all just hung on him trying to find jobs and stuff. So, he told me about this job in Seattle.
So this was let me just interrupt you. This was a master's program?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember the name of this professor? Just out of curiosity.
It's Kempton Jenkins. He was a State Department guy.
Okay.
Well written. You can look him up. And
yeah. Okay. And then he pointed you towards the job in Seattle.
Yeah, that in St. Louis had Perina had a cattle feed sales to the Soviet Union. That's the one I was going for, because that was a big company and stuff. But then it didn't work out. So I wound up with Marine Resources. Best thing that ever happened to me, because do you know about Marine? Tony.
No, I want you to tell me about Marine Resources, because I think it's pretty significant and pretty not well known, I think. I know it's well known among you who all participated in it, and probably the Seattle area, but I think generally people don't know about it. So really, please tell me.
Yeah, it was the owner of Bellingham Cold Storage, which at the time was the largest cold storage facility on the West Coast, had an idea that the Soviets used to fish in our waters up to 12 miles, and then we established a 200-mile limit, so they couldn't fish in our waters anymore. They were too far out to catch any kind of fish. It was too deep. And so he thought, well, I know that the West Coast fishermen are looking for new markets, to sell and stuff. Let's see if we can put the two together. The process, the Soviets still needed the protein, and they had the processing vessels. American fishermen. So he said, why can't the American fishermen catch it? And this was, not undervalued species like hake, yellowfin sole, a little small, little flounder type thing, that Americans didn't want and didn't make much money. And the catcher boats were only 90 feet long, and their holds wouldn't hold a lot of the cost of taking that back into land. They wouldn't pay for the fuel and stuff. So he thought that was a good idea. And in the end, it worked out. So we brought Soviet processing vessels over here and to the Bering Sea, off the coast of California, Oregon, and Washington, and even had a fleet up in Canada. So they needed people on board, Russian speakers, to be the liaison, because you're sending fish of maybe 50 tons in a net on high seas, between two vessels and stuff. And so I was on the radio coordinating everything and stuff. And that's when I learned to speak Russian, because I'm the only non Russian speaker on the, native Russian speaker on the boat.
Right. And so you were on the Russian boat.
Yes. So we'd be out for months at a time.
Yeah.
Up in the Bering Sea, I was on what they call a plavbaza, a huge vessel, 600 feet. And I'd go out there on that 2 summers, 2 years I worked on that. And I think it was like 6 months at a time be on that guy. He'd be out at sea.
How describe those boats a little bit more? I mean, were there a lot of boats that participated in this, and were they large? Tell me more about them.
Yeah, the RTMs were probably 150 feet long, and they were processors, and they were trawlers too. They used to catch themselves and stuff. So now we're just transferring the fish over to them, and they process it. The big boat was not a trawler, but it would take huge tons of fish at a time. That was in the Bering Sea. The year that I was in the West Coast fleet, there was probably about 14 processors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then a fleet of, I don't know, maybe 20 catcher boats. And that was it. Stuff. So,
and the catcher boats were the Americans.
Yes.
Yeah. And so what did the Russians think of you? Well, I mean, how did they react to you being on their boat?
The Russian. This is Soviet times, right?
Yeah, right.
That's Leningrad. I just was amazed how wonderful the people were.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't have anything, So they made a friend. They made a friend. The word drug in Russian translates to friend, but it doesn't translate, because a drug, you'll do anything for him. If, say, you and I are friends, and I'm in a spot and I need money. In America, you never ask a friend for money.
Right.
You had somebody you could trust. In the Soviet Union, you wouldn't even think about it. You just give them the money and stuff.
Right.
They just got into it, and it was just, they didn't have the creature features that we had and stuff. It was just, and it was great. It was just, it was fantastic down there.
And the sailors were the same. Would they form that kind of relationship with the sailors?
Oh, definitely, yeah. On the deck, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was helping them. You get this fish and it just floods the. It'd be knee deep in fish on the deck and stuff, and then so you'd have to push it in with these wooden things they made. Everything was made just in a shop or something. And you push it down there. When they ring the bell in the factory, you'd push more down, and they ring it again. You'd stop because they were filled up. And I would help them do that and stuff. Just, it was just, it was wonderful.
Yeah. And so what, you had like a cabin that you lived in on the boat?
That's the other thing. I was in the United States Coast Guard. And I was on an icebreaker, went up to Greenland and Iceland, and there was the bunks that we slept in were 5 high. You had to decide before you got in the bunk whether you want to sleep on your back or on your stomach, because it was so close together you couldn't turn around.
Wow. Yeah.
The Soviets gave me a whole just a room to myself with a refrigerator and just amazing.
Yeah.
And a window that opened up into the sea and stuff. They took care of me.
Yeah. And so obviously you learned Russian in a way that few Americans in those days understood Russian. I mean, this was the way real people speak. Then
Yeah,
must have been quite a learning experience in that sense as well, right?
yeah. Well, Leningrad set me up for that, and these weren't
Yeah.
Russians; these were Soviets. And it's a big difference
Yeah.
compared to
Well,
I've worked in Russia more than I've worked in the Soviet Union,
uh-huh.
since the changes and stuff, and it's two different countries.
Yeah. So how would you describe the difference in those times, in Soviet times? What was it that sticks out in your mind about that and about the way that people reacted with you, the sailors that you encountered?
They just took me in as one of theirs. It's
Yeah.
just
Okay. Yeah.
and they loved it. Just on the big plaza out in the Bering Sea. I mean, it was a floating city. They had a
Uh-huh.
library, they had a dance hall Saturday nights. They had a band who dance. There was two houses, fore and aft, the place where people live, and there was a deck where we put a net on top of strung across there, and we played volleyball at the net there, so the ball wouldn't go in the ocean and stuff like that. It was just a floating city. It was just great. It was.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
worked on that ship. There were three Americans,
Uh-huh.
and um, there was a government person that counted the fish, and so we give information back to the American authorities of how much fish we're getting and stuff. And then two reps, and we'd work 12 on, 12 off, and it was just great.
Yeah.
You just you had spent time with these people, and it was just wonderful. It
Yeah.
was,
Yeah. So you played volleyball, played cards, hung out? What did you do in your off time?
yeah, we read a lot, that's for sure, and stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, we just hang out with especially the deckhands, because we were always down there in the deck,
Right.
back, because it's where you did your work. 'Cause you had to make sure the ships were lined up, and I mean, it can be deadly,
Yeah.
and I
Uh-huh.
saw some things that were not so good,
Yeah.
because you got 50 tons of fish in high seas, and you're trying to transfer it, and it's tough. But yeah, we got to know the deckhands real well.
Yeah. And how many deckhands were there? Was it 100, 12, 15? What?
It was about 250 people on the crew stuff. So deckhands probably 20.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And you got to know all of them pretty well.
Yep.
Well,
So
okay. And so, how did this work? I mean, there's no convertible currency at this time. So, do you know how it worked business wise? With how did the American fishermen get paid by by transferring this fish to these Soviet processing vessels? How'd they get paid?
it was all barter. We'd give
Uh-huh.
them, they'd get to keep the high volume, low value species, because the Soviets needed the protein. If
Uh-huh.
you've ever been there in Soviet times, the stores are pretty bleak, and the fish you look at, you don't want to eat it. But from an
Yeah.
American standpoint, and they gave us king crab in return, because
Uh,
what they were doing with king crab was just canning it. I mean, you didn't go
uh-huh.
to a restaurant and get $50 for a crab leg or something like that. It was just
Yeah.
so we got it, and then we just marketed it over here. It was very profitable for us.
Oh, okay. So they were catching the king crab on the same boats that you were
No,
processing
no,
the
we
fish.
couldn't do that. No, it
Oh,
was the
different boats.
Coast Guard was out there, and they made sure we weren't doing that.
Oh,
No,
okay.
the stuff
Oh,
was caught off of Kamchatka and
oh, okay. So
Sakhalin and stuff
they
like that.
brought them from
They'd
Kamchatka.
ship it.
Oh,
Right.
and shipped it, and there was some exchange rate established for a barter.
Exactly. Every year
Yeah.
we'd barter, bicker back and forth on what the exchange rate would be and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And were the American fishermen happy with this arrangement?
Oh, hell yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, especially on the West Coast, because um, you couldn't have a better thing. You catching fish, and those were probably more like 20 tons, 25-ton nets. and you deliver it, and then an hour later you're fishing again. If they had to put that on their own holds and drive back, I don't know, 50 miles to the processing place on land, they wouldn't pay for the fuel because the fish
Uh-huh.
weren't worth that much.
Right, right, right. So, what was the role of the cold Talbots and cold storage company? How did they fit with this scheme? Other than they set it up and they set up the company that managed this whole process. But that company, they're trying to get the sense of the business arrangements, how this worked. Can you describe that a little more?
Yeah, it was a very small office. I mean, probably 15, 16 people in the office,
Yeah.
but the moneymaker was the marketing department. They got the
Uh-huh.
crab, and they were marketing the crab like crazy to restaurants and all over the place and stuff.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay, so the Marine Resources Company received the crab, sold it, and then paid the fishermen. Is that the way
yep.
it worked?
Right.
Oh, okay. 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 So the fishermen weren't responsible for doing any marketing or off sales. They just brought it in and brought it to Seattle, and Marine Resources Company then sold it.
Well, the fish that the catcher boats the Americans caught went to
Yeah.
the Soviet Union,
Right, right, right.
and
And
then
they
and
went
the
and they
crab
went
came
to
over.
the Far East for processing and final
Right.
processing.
Well, processing was done on the ships. They were processing vessels
Okay.
and stuff. Yeah, so.
But they weren't canned or anything. They were what,
No, they were gutted and
gutted and
frozen.
frozen.
Yeah.
And then the frozen fish was taken to the Soviet Union.
Right.
And was it like canned or was it then distributed as frozen fish in market?
Frozen blocks. Just
Yeah.
frozen blocks, and they would go to the stores, and you'd see them in the dimly lit stores in the Soviet Union, and
Right.
you'd bet there's fish that Americans didn't really want to eat, but the Soviets needed protein, so.
Right. Right. And how big an operation was this? Was this a substantial amount of fish and protein that was involved with this?
Tons and tons. I have no idea what
Yeah, but tons
those
and
tons.
tons. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we were fishing almost all year round, and
Yeah.
we also had a yellowfin sole fleet up in Alaska, but not in the Bering Sea.
Uh-huh.
So there were 4 fleets with the Canadians and stuff. So there was
And those were Canadian boats that were
Canadian catcher boats
yeah,
delivering to the Soviet processors. Yeah.
okay. But were they also working through Marine Resources?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So Marine Resources with a small core group was a pretty large volume fish producer, correct?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
seller of crab basically. Just that was,
Yeah.
we had a
Right.
supplier of
Right.
crab.
Right.
So it was
Right.
for our supplier and stuff. So
Yeah. So, this was Cold War times. I mean, was there negative reaction to in the general public or people that like, what are you guys doing? You're helping the Soviet Union. I mean, was there any of that you experienced?
certainly not from the American fishermen. There were obvious claims. I mean, they
Yeah,
had a market that they never expected to get and stuff. So
yeah, yeah.
I don't know about people. Like you said, nobody really knows the company and stuff. I don't know that there was anything. I mean, it took an act of Congress to put this together and stuff. So
Uh-huh. Okay.
allow us to do it. And stuff,
Right.
so then, of course, negotiations with the Ministry of Fisheries in Moscow, and that it took a while to get put it together, but it
Yeah.
worked. It worked. Now, of course, it died when because of the fish supplies, the Americans stopped joint venture fishing. And this is, I don't know what year that was, probably, I don't know, 90s or something and stuff. So,
Yeah. What the fish that yeah, it began coming fished out, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And that's why you had the observer on board, the U.S. government observer, to see how much fish was being caught and stuff.
I see. I see. And a part of why it was when I learned about this, it was interesting because I thought under Soviet legislation there weren't joint ventures until the late perestroika period when the law on joint ventures was passed and there were these new joint ventures in one called Perestroika that built office space, and the Trenmas, which is a restaurant in Moscow,
Guy
and
from Trenton, New Jersey. Yeah,
yeah, and
ate
Dial.
there many times.
Oh, you ate there many times. All right, all right. So it's familiar territory, but this was so early that I don't, there had to be special arrangements to make this work for the
Oh yeah,
on each
I mean,
side.
the fishermen lobbied for it and went to Washington,
Uh-huh.
and it just made so much sense that eventually both sides said, "Well, let's try it,"
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
worked until we stopped having joint venture fishing in the United States and stuff. So we had to do other things.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And so how long were you with the company, with Marine Resources?
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. You were on the boats all that time, right?
No, I was only at sea about 2.5 years.
Two and a
I
half years.
worked my way into the operations department,
Uh-huh.
and that was my goal, was to not be a at sea guy for the rest of my life. I
Right.
think we made $50 a day or something like that. So I was able to get into that, and then because of the restrictions on joint venture fishing, we opened an office in Moscow. Our other office was in the Hotka in the Soviet Far East.
Right.
And there was an American there. And every office it was 50-50 joint venture, straight down the middle. So
Right.
every office had an American director and a Soviet director.
Uh-huh.
And I was lucky enough that we opened up a company called SovAm, which was a trading company. And we represented Western companies that wanted to sell into the Soviet Union and Russia. Actually, at that time, it was probably Russia. It was probably the early 90s.
Oh,
And
okay.
well,
So
no, that's not true. 1988 is when I went over there.
okay, that would
Tony Allison, yeah,
yeah.
Tony Allison was the first Moscow director for that company. And
Uh-huh.
then I replaced him after he was there 2 years, and I replaced him. And I was 4 years in Moscow
Uh-huh.
with our company.
I
And
see.
then things got tough financially, so they didn't want me there anymore and pay my salary. So I got another job in Moscow. I wasn't leaving.
Okay. So
I'm here.
so what kinds of companies were selling into Russia that you represented? The Soviet.
Mostly timber and fishing industry.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there was like an Icelandic company that called Morel that made scales that would compensate for weighing fish at sea when you got the waves going up and down and stuff like that, and the scales going. And they had a very good product that you could accurately weigh the fish at sea. There's another Canadian company where you had fish pumps. You take just the fish out of the holds through a pump instead of put them in nets and put them in there and stuff, and it didn't harm the fish and stuff
Uh-huh.
like that, and things like that. And then timber industry also.
And
Did that.
so and you were in Moscow doing this, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because the purchasing was done through Moscow because everything's centralized.
Right. So I was trying to find. We sold everything like Weyerhaeuser. We had I don't know how many millions of cardboard boxes that were waxed. So you could put fish in them and stuff. And Weyerhaeuser would have to stop production on everything twice. We had that sale twice. And at that time, Tony was in Moscow, and I was here. We go down to into Oregon, and load the Soviet vessel with these. And it took 3 days to load all the boxes and stuff in there.
Wow.
So that was one of our big sales.
Yeah. So who stopped the joint venture fishing? That was the U.S. side or the Russian side?
U.S. Yeah.
U.S. side said no more joint venture fishing.
Right.
That's why you pivoted to these products.
Right. Yeah.
So okay, so Marine Resources had the daughter company SovAm, which was the trading company. Am I got that
right?
Okay. Okay.
I'm in my glory. I mean, I never pictured myself through this company of working in Moscow and being director of the office.
Right, right. Where were
I'm,
you?
I'm, I'm from New York area, and Moscow is just like New York. I had it wired. It
Ah,
was
okay. What years were you there as that in that capacity?
88 to 92.
88 to 92. So you were there during this whole transformation that took place, right?
Well, I got stories about that if you want to hear them.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. I'd love to. So you aided Trend Moss. You were there when Perestroika was sort of opening up cooperatives and some of this economic change. And then all of a sudden, did you have any idea that the Soviet Union was going to dissolve? Did you feel it happening, or was it a surprise, or how was it in those years being in Moscow?
Very surprising. It just took everybody by surprise.
Yeah,
I mean, who would have thunk it? I mean,
yeah, yeah.
it's just, Gorbachev and everything. It was just, but it started with Yeltsin.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, blindsided. I
Yeah,
would never have thought that. And
yeah.
then here I am, right in the middle of it. It's just,
Right, right. So did you witness any of this kind of street demonstrations and activities that went on around that time while you were
yeah,
there?
want to get into that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, Yeltsin, I forget what year it was, 90, 89, 90, was supposed to give a rally in Manezhnaya Ploshed, or Manezhnaya Square, which is, you probably know, bordered the National Hotel, the Kremlin, the Armory, all bordered this big square. And I wanted to go down there, and I was coming from our office, which was in the Budapest Hotel, and I had to go past the Bolshoi Theater. And if you're looking at the Bolshoi from the street, on the right side were just miles, not miles, but you couldn't see the end of the tank lines. On the other side was the personnel carriers and the soldiers. On the left of the street, on the left of the Bolshoi, as you're looking at it. So I go past that and I go, oh man, this isn't, I don't know. So I get to the square and I'm looking up to see if there's snipers on the roofs. I didn't know what to expect and stuff. I was a little nervous. Then all of a sudden, this loud noise, it's huge, the tanks started up. And it's about probably 350 meters maybe from the Bolshoi to the square. So the tanks come, and the people that were there were very, very inventive. They took, the trolley buses that, you put the lines up on the wire ahead and stuff, and there's no motors in them. So they grabbed a couple of those, they pulled down the bars, they put the electricity to it, and they pushed them across the road leading into the square. And so the tanks were blocked, and then plus there was traffic in front of them that was blocked and everything. And we thought, man, this ain't good. They're going to shoot this thing, and they didn't. And it was a standstill for a while. And then finally, they got the troops to move the bus and everything, and the tanks came in. I wrote an article that started with, if you've never experienced tanks, they're loud. They're especially loud on asphalt, and they were loud. And yeah, it was just amazing. But it was, except for the 4 kids that got crushed in the tunnel by the American embassy on the ring road, nobody got hurt. It was a party. I mean, it was surreal. It was yearly. You're walking down Kalenin, the street, one of the big streets that goes into spokes off the ring road to the Kremlin. And you're walking down the middle of the street because it's just always traffic jam and everything. There was no cars or anything. It was just eerie, really, really strange stuff.
Yeah.
So we've got pictures of soldiers in Manezhnaya Square eating ice cream, tank guy on top of his tank reading the newspaper and stuff like that. Now CNN, being a news company in America, they got to sensationalize it, and they were going, "Oh, this is going to be havoc, and they're going to kill people and stuff." And it wasn't like that at all. They were there, the presence was there, but there was nothing happened. Now, fast forward to what, 3 years later, the second putsch?
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing. I had another article that wrote, you know, the pooch is in trouble when the tank stopped for red lights. That was the article about this stuff, because it was so benign, although the presence was obviously there and stuff. But then they had the second pooch. That was deadly serious. I mean, we all remember the tank shooting a round through the White House, the Parliament building.
Yeah.
CNN made sure we saw that.
Where were you? Where were you? Were you?
This is my fortuitous that I was not there.
Yeah.
Because there were people in the White House and other places were sniping, just picking off civilians. Astonkina, the tower, the radio tower out by the parks, journalists were killed there, shot and stuff like that, because people were around there, demonstrating. I was working for Caterpillar at the time, and I had a trade show to do in Leningrad or St. Petersburg. I don't know if it was St. Petersburg then yet or it's still Leningrad. And so I had a midnight train that I almost missed because there were no cars that night before these big rallies were going to happen. And the driver was supposed to pick me up, didn't show, and I'm on the street with all these placards and stuff that I got put up for the trade show. And finally, somebody came by and stopped and took me to the train station. I just got on the train as I was about to leave. And so I was in Leningrad, or else I would have been in harm's way. I would have been at one of those two places.
Yeah.
Not that I would have got shot, but yeah, potential was there. So
Yeah.
that was real. That was.
Yeah. Wow. Well, kind of going back to the job aspect of this. So with Marine Resources, you left there. They closed their office in Moscow. Is that?
No, they just went with the Russians.
Oh, okay.
Russian staff, yeah.
And how long did they last as a company?
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably another 2-3 years.
All right. I'm going to interview Tony, and I'll ask him.
He'll know, yeah. Because Tony wound up being the head of the company in Seattle.
Ah, I see. Okay. Well, he'll definitely know then.
He's an amazing person. You'll enjoy him.
Great. I'm looking forward to it. And then so Caterpillar was there in Russia. At that time, it was Russia, and they had an office there, or?
Yes, they did. And it was the only Caterpillar office in the world that sold directly. Caterpillar sold directly. They didn't have a dealership there. And they were trying to sell push their forestry equipment. And I had a lot of experience in that because I was doing that with SovAm and stuff. So they hired me, and my territory was just as a salesperson. And they hired me. My territory was the former Soviet Union. So I was just always on planes.
Wow.
Aeroflot planes back then were not the first class type things.
Right.
My favorite story was I always kept a notebook and I wrote the things that you'd see. The carpet on the floor was not cemented down, and it would just ball up and you'd trip on it and stuff like that. I was in Siberia once during a snowstorm, probably Novosibirsk or someplace like that, and I'm sitting in a window seat over the wing, and I see something out of my eye moving. I look, and they were de-icing the plane. Guy with a broom standing on the wing, pushing the snow off. I'm thinking to myself, do I want to take this plane?
That was a real decision to make, really, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. But the Soviet pilots are, there's a special academy just for commercial pilots. They don't take military people like they do here and around the world. And they are probably the best pilots I've ever seen because the conditions they had and the equipment they were flying was just ancient and terrible and stuff. They were really, really good. I remember coming home from Moscow to New Jersey where my parents lived. And it was a snowstorm while I was there, and they closed down JFK. But 2 planes landed, the Ukrainian flight and an Aeroflot. They interviewed the pilot for the Aeroflot flight. He said, how do you do this? He says, if we don't fly in snow, we don't fly. we live in snow.
Yeah.
They're really good and stuff. But,
yeah. And so Caterpillar was pretty expensive foreign equipment at that point. So was there, what kind of were your customers Western-backed joint ventures, or were they actual Russian enterprises that had cash somehow or convertible currency to buy this expensive equipment? How did that
Well,
work?
in the beginning, it was mostly just government. I mean, you had to go through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and make your
Yeah.
deals there and stuff. So it was all government money.
Oh,
And then
okay.
they're selling timber to Japan and places like that, and they want to be able to get it out and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So
but I logged up a lot of frequent flyer miles on Aeroflight, I'll tell you.
yeah. I bet you weren't able to use them then for much.
For some
So,
reason, they didn't have the program. I'm not sure.
right. And so even though you were based in Moscow, you had to go to the Far East to make the sale, but where were the headquarters of all these companies in Moscow? Is that where the business was done?
No, they just got the money from the government.
Oh, okay. So you had to go out and convince them to buy Caterpillar and not Komatsu or some Japanese or some domestic alternative equipment?
Yeah,
Or
that was part of it.
yeah,
But I mean, I didn't know anything about the technical side of the equipment I'm selling, but they
yeah,
did. I mean, so they knew it and stuff. So I didn't have to worry about going to an engineering school or something
right.
to
But
explain
so
them.
they knew what they wanted, in other words.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And if your specs matched what they wanted to buy it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And so what was the sticking point had to be price, right?
Yeah, we did negotiate the price and stuff. If the Ministry of Forestry thought that they could make a profit with better equipment, they'd buy it and
Yeah.
they'd fork out the money and stuff. So
Yeah. And was it a good market for Caterpillar?
yeah,
Yeah.
I did well. I did well.
Yeah.
So I got a percentage of the
Oh,
sales. So,
okay. All right. Good.
I actually bought two houses because you can't spend much in Russia.
Right.
So so I thought, well, I'll buy houses in Seattle.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So,
And so were you coming back to the US frequently or not
not
frequently?
frequently, maybe twice a year. Well, it depends. I mean, I would take these people, especially if they bought, and take them to the States and wine and dine them and stuff like that. Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
But also take them to the factories,
Yeah.
to see what's going on and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
Where was Caterpillar's headquarters?
in Moscow.
Yeah, but
In,
I mean in the US, where would you bring them in the US?
Caterpillar was in Peoria, Illinois. They're in
Oh, okay.
Chicago. They're in
Yeah.
Chicago now. The big three are all together: Racine, Wisconsin, Peoria, and now Chicago for Caterpillar, and then in Iowa for John Deere.
Oh, okay.
They're
Okay.
all close together. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So how long did you stay with Caterpillar?
I was there until 4 years. I was with them.
Uh-huh.
And the guy that hired me got transferred someplace else. The new guy wasn't really keen on me, and so I went looking for a job. And Case, another, from Racine, Wisconsin, was looking to open an office. So I interviewed for that, and I got that job. So I opened an office for them there, and then ran it for 2 years
And
until
when was that?
97, 98, 99. Wow,
Okay.
just
Yeah. So you were there during the 98 financial crisis.
exactly. And then they closed their office then too.
They
So
did.
then I wound up going back to Seattle for 2 years.
Ah,
Um, yeah,
okay. So
so
so they closed in 98. Did they ever reopen?
no, so they didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So 98, so that was a pretty big event for Western businesses in Moscow. I mean, as I understand it, right? There was some never came back and others did after a while.
Yeah, I don't want to badmouth Case, but they weren't as organized as Caterpillar. So,
Okay. Okay. Did Caterpillar close in 98?
no,
No, they stopped. They
they
stopped.
expanded because they started doing building dealerships. around and that's when I went back in 2001. I was working for a small company here in Seattle, and they put me in their Sakhalinsk office because there was a lot of oil and gas projects offshore there. You had
Yeah.
Exxon and Shell and Gazprom and Lukoil and all the big oil companies, Russian and American, that were foreign. And,
Yeah.
and then that didn't work out. We didn't see each other. But Caterpillar wanted to open a dealership there, and so they hired me to start from scratch, which it was the most difficult job I've ever had. Started with 7 people in a small 2-room office in central Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, and then we bought a metal shop. It was huge with all Soviet equipment and stuff, and we had to dig that stuff out of the cement and everything, get rid of it. We had to renovate the building and everything, get it going. It took me 13 years to get it going, but
Wow.
we had one of the
You were there for 13 years in Houston?
yeah stuff. So I finally got the right team going, probably 11 years into it, and we'd have anywhere from 50 to 75 machines on site with all the requirements of the oil companies. Having it on site was what sold. It was right there. You come in and kick the tires and that type of thing. Plus, the other thing, Caterpillar does generators, and that was really big. Exxon, for example, instead of having oil platforms at sea, they would slant drill from the beach out to the pockets of oil, like 14 kilometers and stuff like that. So that's the northern part of Sakhalin Island, minus 40 degrees up there in the wintertime. You had to have reliable electricity and stuff like that. And we sold the backup stuff for that stuff. So I had to not train, but get trained. All these people I'm hiring and stuff. When I left, there's about 135 people.
Wow.
Started with a dealership that I don't know what the dealership is in Boston, but it would be no difference the way it ran, except that you probably had higher sales than we did. We were more like probably $70 million company. Gross sales, but we were the same standards as NC Machinery here in Seattle and stuff. So.
Right. And Caterpillar kind of stuck with you for that period of time then.
Yeah, I had 2 years left on my contract, and I left because my son, I think I told you I had 2 sons, and they're Russian. My wife's Russian, so he wanted to go to high school in the U.S. So I pulled the pin early. Left a chunk of change on the table, but in Russia, there's no high school interscholastic sports. If you want to play sports, you join a club, Spartak, Dynamo, Red Army, and stuff, and you play one sport and you play it all year round and stuff. And he wanted to play baseball and American football and stuff like that. So I pulled the pin and came over here in 2015.
Okay. Did you meet your wife there in Yuzhno-Sakhalin?
Yeah, it was when I was with Caterpillar as a salesperson. I used to go to the Far East. She's from Khabarovsk, the Russian Far East, and because Caterpillar didn't have people like myself that would travel until they hired me, and didn't have dealerships, they used Mitsubishi as their Far Eastern agent, I would say. Stuff. She worked for them and stuff. So yeah.
Okay. And how did your son know about American sports?
Well, we traveled all over the place and stuff.
Okay.
I actually was a baseball coach in Moscow. Stuff in 1988, there was an Olympic sport, so the Soviets wanted to develop a baseball program, and so I was able to be an unofficial coach of the 14 and 15-year-olds, the team that they had. They built a baseball field on Moscow State University campus. I was there for the opening. The University of Miami played a Japanese college. And Peter O'Malley was there, and a lot of people were there and stuff, and that was pretty cool. But so I got to coach baseball. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. And Did you coach baseball later in the Far East? Was there actually interest in baseball?
It was a little bit, but not enough for me to get involved in and stuff.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. Did baseball become a thing among kids?
no, because the funding dried up, and so they
Okay.
never followed through with it and stuff. So
Yeah.
it was
Okay.
a shame because some of these kids, invested 3 years of their lives to do this, and but it didn't work out.
Didn't work out. Yeah. Yeah. So, were there many other Americans and expats in Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk while you were there?
Oh, there were tons and tons. These are big oil companies with
Ah,
big
okay.
projects. Huge. They
Okay.
opened up. They built the world's largest LNG plant
Ah,
there and
okay.
stuff. I mean, it was.
Okay.
I mean, this was the magnitude was crazy. I mean, to have the amount of machinery that we had just on hand was a lot of money, but we sold enough of it that we were making money. Stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it
Yeah.
was.
And so what did that mean in terms of the character of the city? Were there lots of bars, restaurants, things that catered, I don't know, health clubs, things that catered to foreigners there?
Definitely, definitely. And then the Russian people there were a lot of them were well off and stuff.
Uh-huh.
So, but yeah, there was a Korean consortium that was going to build a 27-hole golf course and with a hotel complex and all that stuff and spas and things. And their Russian partner tried to steal it from them and stuff, and it fell apart. But they had already built 9 holes. They used my equipment, by the way. They rented my equipment to build it,
Yeah.
and so we could play golf.
Ah,
I lived in 6 minutes from the ski gondola, so in the wintertime we could ski and stuff. And yeah, expat bars all over the place and stuff. And it was just crawling with expats. Very few Americans, but
ah,
tend to be Brits and Aussies and Kiwis and Dutch and stuff from Shell and all that stuff like that. But
uh-huh.
yeah, it was definitely a fun place to be. And the beaches and the fishing are all great. It was a fun place to live.
Yeah.
Stuff.
So
In fact,
what was it? How long was winter?
I guess depending first snow maybe end of October to May and stuff. Didn't
Oh,
get cold there. The coldest I ever saw was minus 28 Celsius, which is not cold for Russia.
yeah,
Minus 40 is what is when they say it's cold, and that
yeah.
minus 40, of course, is the point where Fahrenheit and Celsius meet. They're both minus 40 and stuff. But the problem was they had buffalo snows. I mean, really, really deep snow.
Yeah.
And in the spring, it took them a long time to get their system on the roads to get rid of the water. So they'd be swimming to work. So
The big spring melt. Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And when did you leave there? What year?
2015.
2015. Okay. So, w- so I'm fuzzy on the details, but I know that there was conflicts with the Russian government over those plants and the ownership, and was that going on while you were there? Were there discord between the Russians and the multinationals that were producing the oil and gas there?
No, not while I was there.
Okay.
Afterwards, it came. It came afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
actually, it came with the sanctions. Is what stopped it all.
Right.
When the Russians went into Ukraine, that's when everything fell off the tracks.
Yeah.
No, that
So
wasn't.
was the dealership, how long did the dealership you founded exist?
It still does. Caterpillar makes a machinery in China. They have a Caterpillar dealers or yeah, manufacturing in China.
Okay.
But they opened up a place where they have a different brand. It's a Chinese brand, but made by Caterpillar. So I understand that it's nothing near the magnitude that I left, but
Right.
they're still using the facility apparently.
Okay. 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 Huh. Interesting. So they haven't abandoned the market completely.
Just
But
skirting around the sanctions. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So when you were there, and I know, I know at that time it was felt like Russia was going to be integrated into the world economy. This was going to go on and as it was, and yet it didn't. It didn't. And was that a surprise to you? This kind of
No,
level of animosity? No?
because Yeltsin changed it, said that to make the president have all powers, right? So
Right.
that just set up people like Putin. I
Uh,
mean,
uh, uh,
so there was Yeltsin was popular, but so was Trump, and
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah,
Yeltsin didn't have the guy was a drunk, and
yeah,
he just the wrong person took over and
yeah,
stuff. So
yeah,
unfortunately, and stuff.
yeah.
Now, one of the things that we go back to the changes. Is probably the hardest part of me being in the Soviet Union was the gut-wrenching effects of hyperinflation.
Uh-huh.
It just affected the older population, the pensioners and stuff. I mean,
Right.
these are the people that went through collectivization, the Stalin purges, the horrors of the German invasion, and they're
Yeah.
looking for the good life when communism finally comes and stuff, and their dreams were dashed overnight, and their life savings became pocket change overnight. And
Hmm.
it was very difficult for me to see.
Uh-huh.
Um, it
Yeah.
was I got involved with the French had a lot of good programs. I've worked in a soup kitchen. I delivered food to invalids, food packages that the French organization would have and stuff like that. Um, it was um, it was very very tough to see these people just. I mean, it got even murderous. There were scams that people would go up to an old person and say, "You can keep. I'm going to buy your apartment. You stay there until you die." And then they kill them. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was well documented in the papers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that was a tough one. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So it was a kind of ambivalence about all these changes then.
Well, that yeah. I mean, it was a homeless encampment. I never thought I'd ever see that. A homeless encampment just off of Red Square.
Yeah.
Between the Rosia Hotel and St. Basil's, there was just a tent city there protesting and stuff for months and months. I
Yeah.
mean, never in the Soviet Union that would happen and stuff.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of homeless and stuff, and it was people suffered.
Yeah. 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 And did you get the sense that after a while Russians sort of tired of this new model? I mean, did they start to push back against it? That from
I mean, sure, but I mean, it was adapt or die. I mean, it was just they
right,
had to. It just the changes were here, and and then a few years down the road, you're going to malls with ice skating rinks in Moscow,
yeah, yeah,
so, and stuff. You know,
yeah,
stuff. So
yeah. So you did a lot of you had a lot of interaction with Russians in training people and developing them as your staff and could you talk about what that was like? Or I mean, um, how quickly did they pick up this business skills? How difficult was that? Anything about that you could talk about?
yeah, sure. A lot of them were things like lawyers and accountants and cleaning people and stuff like that who already knew their stuff more
Right.
better than I did and stuff like that. It was the mechanics that were the main thing to get them trained. I mean, and getting them to get the shop in order too. I mean, you can't have you have to have like an operating room if you're going to open up an engine and rebuild it. You can't have a speck of dust in it. So you got to have a sterile room and stuff. And then just trying to get them to get Western standards and stuff. But they caught on pretty good. A lot of people didn't make it. hired 500 people, the times I was there, if not more. Some just didn't make it, and stuff. So,
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
said, it was probably 11 years before I finally got the team together
Yeah.
where it was clicking smoothly.
Yeah. Why would those people not make it? What was it? Or is there anything in common, or is it just individual for them?
Just individuals. I mean, I'm sure it'd be the same thing here, in there, but then, well, sometimes I had people that like sales people that shouldn't have been there, but I had a boss in the States who hired some of these people and stuff, and so he was great. Everything he said he was going to do, he did for me. We didn't have a contract; we just had a few emails and stuff, and everything. I got paid and everything. Got my trips out and all that stuff. But some of the people he put in there, I didn't agree with, but we got by. We got by.
These are foreigners, Americans that he hired and put in there?
No, Russians.
Russians.
There were no.
How,
The
how
only
did,
foreigners were the engineers, and they were Egyptian. 3 engineers for the putting the packages together for the electrical things, and we had to build our own containers because you, you, especially with Exxon, you're on the beach and it's windy and it's you can't get sand in these these things and stuff, these generators. So the regular containers, 40 foot and 20 foot, weren't wide enough, so we actually had to start a container building section of the building also to put these things in and stuff. So they picked up pretty good. They picked up pretty good.
yeah. And the Egyptians had been trained by Caterpillar. They were part
Yeah,
of it.
they were good. But that's very complicated, and as I say, it was life threatening if
Yeah.
the power went out up north. You got hundreds of people in these work barracks.
Yeah. 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 Very interesting. And so what do you, I mean, do you think, I know this is kind of a dumb question, but I want to ask it anyway, but do you think you made an impact on Russia or Russian life, and as opposed to how much of Russia made an impact on you? I think I know what your answer is, but just, interested in how you think about that, you know?
Well, I'd like to think that through the social work I did and coaching of baseball and trying to mentor the people in the dealership in Sakhalin, that I had an impact on some individuals. But I think it's the other way around. That I was just amazed. My youngest son, said, I look at Americans and I look at Russians, and Americans are pretty shallow. It's just until they can't watch a football game or their favorite reality show or buy another beer or turn on the lights, everything's fine. We're in Russia, it's the deeper. Even in Russia, the Soviet Union, definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, how many Americans play chess? And very few Russians don't play chess. It's just I feel more. I've been here now 10 years, and I feel more comfortable in Russia than I do here.
Yeah.
I don't fit in here anymore.
Yeah.
That's,
When was the last time you were in Russia?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a long time.
Yeah, probably 7 years ago or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Are you able to stay in touch with people there at all or not?
Yeah, we do that and stuff. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
My wife commutes back and forth because she's younger than me and she wants to get her pension over there. So she's got a job over there, and so she spends 6 months over here and 6 months over there. So
Ah, I see. I see. So and she doesn't encounter any difficulties on either side making that work, going back and forth?
no, so the boys can't go back. They're here with me.
Yeah.
Now it's conscription's up till 30 years old, and
Right.
they're 25 and 22, so they can't go back, or else they get a free trip to Ukraine.
Yeah. 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 Wow. So, and are you doing anything related to Russia now?
Yeah.
Well, so did we talk about everything that you wanted to talk about? Were there things you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch on?
No, I thought that my experiences firsthand with the tanks and stuff like that was probably the most unique thing I had to contribute stuff since
Yeah,
I was there. So
yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's pretty unique that you were out at sea for months at a time and Russian trawlers. So, that's pretty unique.
it's different, yeah. But
Yeah,
but they talk about total immersion. Like when I went to Monterey,
yeah,
2 weeks and stuff, it was supposed to be total immersion. We were supposed to speak Russian, in the dorms and stuff like that.
right.
Well, it isn't obviously because we're all Americans or foreigners, not Russians. But you get on a ship and you're the only American on it. you're, you're in total immersion.
Yeah, yeah, you're in total immersion.
You can't turn the TV on at the end of your shift and watch, Seinfeld or something.
Yeah, right, right, right,
You're
right.
watching Russian movies with the rest of the crew.
Exactly, exactly. Uh, all right. Well, look, I appreciate, your sharing your experience with me. Um, and I wanted to capture this, particularly the marine resources experience, but your experience with Caterpillar and the Far East, I think the Far East is in fairly well neglected in sort of studies of that time, and people focus a lot on Moscow and St. Petersburg, and that's sort of the center of everything. And it isn't really. There's a much bigger story, and so I'm glad to be able to add that and add it to the archive. So thank you for that.
You bet. Tony was in the Nahodka office
Yeah,
for 2 years too, so you'll get more
great.
Russian Far East stuff there. So,
I
well,
will.
Daniel, good luck with your project. I don't know if I
Good,
helped you
good,
very much,
good.
but
All right. And no, you did. You did. Thank you very much. And the sum of the parts is greater than any one of those parts. I think that the number of interviews that I have and the breadth of coverage is what's important. And it's important to me. And I hope it will be important to other people because, like you, I share this feeling of how much that experience changed me and whatever I can preserve of that for the future, I'd like to do it.